All right, back again. I will leave it to you to guess how many hours later that I'm picking up and doing a part two. And I did decide to break it into job analysis, a completely different topic than human resource law. If we were in class, we would probably be coming back from our 7 o'clock break, and we would settle in, and I would switch topics and head off in this direction now. So uh, job analysis is just such a critical at the heart of human resource management. To do good job analysis, to do good job specification writing, and all the things that that impacts, as we'll see coming up. And then a few words on compensation. I'm probably not going to go real deep into compensation, just touch on it a little bit. Um, See if perhaps we can come up with a budget exercise somewhere down the line. I used to be able to bring the city budget uh, with me and share that with you all. It would be an enormous PDF. So I'm not quite sure of how I'm going to maybe cut and paste something out of a city budget book just to show you an example of how we set salary schedules and salary steps and salary brackets. But let's get into a little bit of job analysis. So the first quote, the foundation of human resource management from which all else flows the idea of the job. So you're creating an organization, you're reforming an organization, you're building an organization, you break it down, you break it down into the smallest duties and actions and determine who will be doing what. So how do you define that? How do you make those assignments? How do you select those people? How do you define that job? Okay. And from there, you then take take it from that individual unit, the job, and begin doing almost like an affinity diagram. What jobs are related? What jobs are similar? And if you start connecting those dots, you'll go from individual jobs to functional areas of jobs. So the financial stuff may head into one direction. The customer service portion may head into another. The sales, um, the compliance requirements, the administrative requirements. And from there, you will begin to build functional areas, units, bureaus, departments by first breaking down into the individual and then by reassembling into into the related. Hope that makes sense. Okay, break down into the individual and then rebuild and cluster as you begin to build an organization and define the various functions and units of the organization. The second quote here, uh, jobs exist independent of their occupants. Whenever you write a job description, while you may be speaking to an incumbent, while you may be looking at your own job responsibilities, you aren't writing it for the individual. Okay, that position should exist prior to an incumbent and beyond the current incumbent. So we're defining a job, we're defining a set of responsibilities. The selection of the individual comes later, okay, and hopefully you do a good match. Okay, so but the job focus are the duties, the job, not the individual. So this is a bit of a repeat of what I just said. We'll see in just a moment the number of things good job analysis will impact. The what is a job broken down into the smaller tasks and duties, and then so stop and ask yourself, um, when would you need to do a job analysis? What conditions, at what time would you want to revisit or begin taking a look and defining the responsibilities of a job? So I would ask you, so when do you think? Here's the answer. So you have a new organization, you're building an extension of something that already exists, you're building something new from the ground up. There's new jobs that need to be added to a particular functional area. There's changes in jobs, changes in job responsibilities, changes in technology, um, resolving issues or problems. An employee in city government, and I suspect in most organizations, if they're run well, an employee has every right to ask for a job analysis. I don't feel like the work I'm doing is reflected in the job description that I was given. And in city government, we would get to that request. Now, if you remember a day in the life of Maria, um, the job analysis, the job audits were consistently pushed to the bottom of the pile. And that's the way it was with the city. We would have a backlog of job audits requested that we would get to when we were able to get to it. Uh, a year could go by, but that's because of the other priorities that would intrude upon the normal workflow. Driven by the organization, it's time to reorganize, it's time to change the business, it's time to create something new or modify something that exists. Maybe we need to downsize, maybe we're facing a budget crisis and we need to look at the whole organization. So to the resolving issues or problems, it could be something initiated by the organization or by an individual employee. So here's the uses. Here's the reach of a good job analysis. You're going to do a job analysis. You're going to create a job specification, a job description. You're going to put a job into a certain classification. Is it a laboring class? Is it a professional class? Is it a management class? That eventually will determine where does it fit in an organizational chart. So you're going to in some way classify that job. Also, a different meaning to the word classification would be found in civil service law, in government, and in academia. So when we talk about the unclassified service, the competitive class, the non-competitive class, the exempt class, which will be next lesson that we do. But job classification, performance appraisal. If I want to sit any one of you down and say, let's look at the progress of your work, one working document that I should have with me and that you should have with you is, here's what your job description says. And you see, there's the discrepancy. There's well, this is what it says I'm supposed to be doing, but most of my time is spent doing something else. A good manager should address that. If a good manager doesn't address that, an employee should ask for it to be addressed. Okay, but for performance appraisal, for training, we're trying to develop you. One of the things that you're going to see in a job specification, in a template that I'm going to give you, is what are the entry level knowledge, skills, and abilities, so upon taking the job, and what are the full performance knowledge, skills, and abilities, which usually means about a year into the job. So how do we manage that gap? How do we manage that learning curve? And one of the things would certainly be through training and the things you need to know, the things that you need to be proficient at. So what do we need to plug an individual into over the next few months to get them to that full performance level? And then beyond that, what's the career development? What's the organizational growth? What's the job family? How do we move from a junior accountant to an accountant to a senior accountant? What kind of development would be needed? What kind of training and education would be needed? Worker mobility. Mobility, how can I progress from one position to another? How might I be able to cross a department line? What kind of management skills would I need to work my way up into management ranks? And conversely, worker mobility could be determined in reverse. So if there's layoffs, if there's workforce reduction, what are your bumping rights? What are your retreat rights? What are your seniority rights? So that will be determined largely by what position are you in and how is that position defined, and what's the rest of the population look like? Workforce planning. What's the 1-year plan, the 5-year plan? Is it a growth plan? Is it a reduction plan? We can get into the issue of diversification and managing inclusively. Keep that in mind. And then what are the safety protocols? How do we determine what's needed for any individual position or family of positions? I believe I've mentioned before, I will say it again and probably yet again, that you do a job hazard analysis whether a position seems inherently safe and sound. You do it anyway. Okay, it could be an office position, it could be somebody at a desk all day. Well, somebody with a desk all day may need some ergonomic consideration. What is that setup like? So never take safety for granted. And keep in mind too that the real lesson of human resource management is that a professional in the field is not going to be expert at every position in the organization. So that's the do not assume. Do not assume. I at one point was writing computer job specifications. I was writing um, accountant job specifications. I was writing security superintendent job descriptions. I knew nothing about those areas, so I had to learn, I had to study, show you some resources in just a bit of how you do that. But that's part of the take nothing for granted. Ask the questions, even if it seems like they're inconsequential. So in a job analysis, what you want, the end result is to develop the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are needed for that job. The knowledge, skills, and abilities. And again, we will talk about entry-level knowledge, skills, and abilities, full performance knowledge, skills, and abilities, and you will see those also reflected in the minimum qualifications that you're requiring for the job. The O you find in some organizations, including the template that I use, and I'm going to have you use, is for KSAs, knowledge, skills, and abilities. Sometimes you'll see an O, so other, what other attributes, what other qualities, um, customer friendliness, team playerness. What other things are you looking for a successful candidate in this position? So KSA, sometimes O's. So who does a job analysis? Actually, a number of people. If done properly, there should be enough checks and balances that that you're going to end up with a really good product, because you're going to check it, you're going to cross-reference, you're going to verify the information that you've recorded, verify the way you've transcribed that information into a job specification before you really end up with a final product. So in a well-developed human resource office where you have good staffing and lots of specialists, you're going to have a human resource consultant professional that will be given this assignment. That individual is going to have to work with line managers and supervisors. They're going to have to work with job incumbents, people currently in the position. And then we have this other category at the end, says consultants, or what we would also often refer to as SMEs, SME, subject matter experts. So in the example that I gave you of me having to write a job description and ultimately a civil service exam, come to think of it, on the position of security superintendent. There was actually a point when the city didn't have a management oversight of its security positions. I believe at one point they were part of a Rochester Police Department unit, and the supervision came from RPD. But then the city broke it off from RPD, and so we needed to find a security. We used the title superintendent. I knew nothing of the needs of a security agency, a security function. So I turned to subject matter experts. And again, in class, I would say, so who do you think, who would I call in? Who would I say, can you give me some help as to what I should be looking for? And the subject matter experts, there were three, and it was a total courtesy thing. Could you give me an hour? Could you come and talk to me? And it was the director of security for Kodak, the director of security for Xerox, and then I threw in a private. I think it was the CEO of Doyle Security. Come and give me an hour and let me pick your brain. Come and tell me what kind of knowledge, skills, and abilities should an incumbent in this position have. And they did that. I think it was a one-off. They came in and spent some time with me and set me on the right direction. Okay. So one of the first things that you're going to see, one of the very first things out of the starting blocks on job analysis is a job audit questionnaire, job analysis questionnaire. And that's step one. A job analysis questionnaire is that document where you try to capture as much about a position as possible, in as much detail and minutia as is possible. It may not all make it to a final job specification. In fact, it probably shouldn't. But this should be the one document. The questionnaire should be the one document where you get the detail by detail of the work that needs to be done. And then you'll see two columns. You'll see it broken down in two ways. Tell us which of these is done most frequently on a scale of 1 to 5, and tell us which of these is done that are most critical on a scale of 1 to 5. So you may be in you see a lot of the stuff that you do is very mundane, but you just do a lot of it. So you need to show that. You need to show those mundane things that occur frequently. It would not be fair to have a position represented without showing that range. And then conversely, certainly anything that's critical, any of the critical aspects of the job, you absolutely want to show. So take an emergency responder, for example. An emergency responder, we hope doesn't have an excessive number of calls. There may be a lot of routine things that go on, so you want to show the routine, but then you absolutely must show the critical things that are part of the position. So we're also then looking for supervision. What kind of decisions do we make? Are there any budgetary or financial responsibilities? How much contact with others? Are you working in isolation? Are you working in an office by yourself? Are you always working from home? But how much contact do you have with others? That might get into the whole team aspect of how do you relate to other people? How do you relate to customers? Is it a customer service kind of a position? Physical requirements, environmental requirements, what are the confines of the space? Are you lifting? Are you standing? That you're going to find in the job hazard analysis mostly. Okay. And then finally, what are the worker requirements? And that literally means that. What do incumbents in the position see as support that they need? So that could simply be, training and education. That could be coaching. That could be environmental. It could be safety, PPE. But you want that perspective. You want that point of view. What does an incumbent in the position need to feel that they're able to do the job effectively? In the template that I'm going to give you for a job specification, you're going to see these following 6 categories, and I'm going to ask you adhere to it. There are variations on the same theme, but this is relatively standard stuff. And I kind of give you what each of these is about. So once you've done your job analysis, once you've done your job hazard analysis, you begin to take that material and see which of this should now be transcribed into a job specification. What's the really important things? How can I concisely present this job to any interested party? So any interested party can be an incumbent in the position, a manager of the position. It can be used as a recruitment tool for the general public. This is the position that we're recruiting for. And so it should be clear what the position is, where it is, and again, we're going to get into the things most frequently done. So the distinguishing features of the class is a general statement of purpose in 4 or 5 or 6 sentences. Tell me what this position does, and very importantly, who it does it for. Right? So I have seen some job specifications turned in that say, this is an administrative position in the healthcare field. Doesn't tell me where it's at. I'd rather have something, this is a position within Rochester Regional Health, or this is a position within University of Rochester Medicine, or this is a service position in Applebee's. But tell me where it is, because the where really gives it context. So what industry is it in? What specific organization is this job in? Where am I working? Okay, so distinguishing features of the class, the general statement of purpose. Also, general statement of purpose, how much supervision does the position give or receive? I'll post a couple of examples. So I'll post a city planner series, and you'll see how it distinguishes between a couple of different areas that the city planner may be assigned to. And then I'll also share with you a very generic one, municipal a municipal assistant, which is like an entry level into city government, or it can be placed anywhere at any time, and it's so bare bones. There's really not a lot to it, but it's an entry level position in city government. So distinguishing features of the class. The typical work activities, there they are. The breakdown of the most important and most frequent. Now there's no over under on this. What I would say is, if I said to get into the minutia when you do the analysis, the job questionnaire, get into the minutia, it doesn't all transfer over. You don't want an endless list of typical work activities that go on for 18 or 20 or 25 different items, because they're just going to get lost. So the judgment that you have to make is based on the frequency, based on the criticality, how many of these will I include in a job specification? So for me, an over under is sort of 8. If all you have is 8, you put them all in. But if you really have to winnow through 20 or 25, you probably want to hit your top 10 or your top 12, so enough that you'll have an accurate representation of the activities of the job, but not so overwhelming that it begins to get lost, and not so brief. And if it's too brief, if you come out of a job analysis with, I only do 4 things, I highly recommend that you ask the question again. Because when I say to go to minutia, I mean go to minutia. So if it's interact with customers, or if it's counter service, or if it's cleaning, or if it's find out what that person's doing for an 8-hour shift. Okay, because my guess is if they're telling you they're doing 4 things, ask them what's behind the 4. What comprises those 4 things. So I would look for a balance of in like an 8 to 12 range for what gets transcribed into a job specification. Then we have the entry level knowledge, skills, and abilities. And that would be specifically knowledge of, skill in, ability to. Okay, so you need to take those and draw those out and define those. So knowledge of municipal government finance, knowledge of SUNY Brockport policy and procedure, knowledge of patient care. Okay, entry level. And then we distinguish between that and what we call full performance. The difference here is simply, when you enter a job, you should have a certain set of knowledge, skills, and abilities that kind of come with the profession that you are prepared with. The full performance, at the very least, will speak to what is it that I'm going to learn in the first year on the job. So I just mentioned before knowledge of municipal finance. And that could be an entry level. I have my degree in finance and accounting. After a year, we would want that person to know City of Rochester specific things. So the entry and the full would become general knowledge and organization specific knowledge. Okay, so knowledge of human resource law, policies, and procedures. Knowledge of SUNY Brockport human resource policies and procedures. So in that year's time, you've got to have growth and more detailed knowledge for the organization. Okay, there may be some other caveats there where full performance will also bring, but at the very least, look for that worksite specific stuff. Minimum qualifications. So this is a screening tool. What are the minimum qualifications you need to do this job? A bachelor's degree in accounting. A master's degree in public administration, a master's degree in social work, a bachelor's degree in social work. And here's where you get into some variation. What's the trade-off between level of education and amount of experience? So do you give a person who has a master's degree or beyond more credit than you would a person with an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree? And would you add to the associate's or the bachelor's more additional work experience? So you could write a job specification that says a bachelor's in social work and 2 years experience, or a master's degree and 1 year experience or no experience, depending on the situation. So what's the trade-off? What are you willing to allow? Um, do you want supervisory experience? 5 years experience, of which two of those five will include supervision of others. So what are the minimum qualifications, and knowing that minimum means that this is a screening item that will help you sort of make a selection and see who moves on in the process of selection. And then finally, there are special requirements. Does the job require a driver's license? Or do you need to be first aid, CPR certified? Do you need to have professional licensure for plumbing or electrical? What kind of special licenses or certifications do you need? And those need to be shown as well. Okay, you're going to see some examples of this in what I send you. So how do we get to the bottom of all of this? I've already talked about the job analysis questionnaires. It's a critical tool, one that I'm going to supply for you going through this process. There's other ways to get to some of this information. Position descriptions are where you would simply ask a person to write out a narrative. Write for me everything that you do over a week's period of time. Keep a log, keep detailed activities of what you're doing over a specific period of time for your position. So if you have 5 people in a city planner job, or if you have 5 people in an office assistant job anywhere, you may ask those 5 people, keep for me a record of everything that you do for the next week, and that you will assemble that, you will review those, and you will weigh the importance of each, the importance and the criticality, and you will try to translate that. So that would be a first draft, not a final draft. Okay. The functional statement is, tell me what your office does. So that begins to put things in context. Right? So tell me within your office, what service are you providing? What kind of interaction are you providing? What's a little bit of the workflow? All right. So a functional statement is simply a broader expression of the individual position statements. And then there's, of course, the classic org chart. The org chart, which shows placement, within each organization, and how does one position relate to the rest. You can do focus groups. You could say, I'd like to get together with all resident assistants, RAs. I'd like to get together with all RAs on campus, and I'd like to have a focus group. I want you to talk to me about what you all do in your position. And you just might chart things out and put things up on a wall until you have consensus. The individual interview or an audit is sit down one to one. And by the way, you're not picking any one of these. You're probably using a number of these. Okay, so for example, if you do a position description, you don't want to necessarily go on a person's list of things I did over the past week. You're going to want to probably take that and then sit down with an individual or sit down with a group of individuals and test it out. Say, so what I'm picking up is, and how accurate is that, and which of these do you feel most strongly about, and which should be included in a job specification? So whether it's a position description, a functional statement, the org chart is always supportive, a focus group, an individual interview, you're going to be wanting to test these and cross-reference these tools against each other. The research is a little bit of what I said before. The research is calling other experts, other subject matter experts in the field, and doing research. The link that I have here, back in my civil servicey days, we had the Bible of Job Analysis. It was called the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. Dictionary of Occupational Titles. It's now at this website, occupationalinfo.org, and you can play around with it. Just kind of follow a track into it, pick a general area of interest, and keep playing with it until you get down to the one distinguishing feature, the one description, the one descriptor, one paragraph descriptor. We have fun with this in class. Maybe we'll see if we could do it next week. Um, we've come up with everything from, I don't know, bartenders to, zookeepers. So, so we'll see what pops up just by following a thread. Okay, but these are all tools to be. So how do you conduct the employee interview? Look, at anytime you sit down with an employee, especially if you're coming from some position of authority or threat, I'm here to do a job analysis on you. You know, why would you ever need to do that? So you can always put somebody on edge. So you want to put people at ease. This is a follow-up to a request that you made last year, and we're finally getting to it. We've had on our work list that we want to do a refresh of job specifications, and we've come to the letter M and municipal assistant, and we'd like to sit down and talk to you about your experience in this particular job. So you're setting the tone. Go out to the work site. Try never ever to pull people into your office. Okay, be accommodating. Go out. Not only is it a courtesy to the employee, but it's helping you get job knowledge. You want to see the site. You want to be there. Okay, to get a better sense of the job. And then again, what's the purpose of the audit? Is this just a refresh? Is there something else going on that you can share in the organization? So the city planner that I'm going to share with you says the city's Department of Neighborhood and Business Development. Back during the Duffy years, the mayor wanted to consolidate two departments. So we had a Department of Economic Development and a Department of Neighborhood Development. And they did so much the same thing. There would be inspections to be scheduled. There would be certificates of occupancy and certificates of use. And we basically had two departments, actually three departments, replicating work, or if not replicating work, doing, a real close approximation to what the other was doing. So the mayor said, I think we should just merge these two. And so we did. And so that city planner job spec that I will share with you was the result of a merger between the city's Department of Economic Development and the city's neighborhood development. Okay, so what's the purpose? Why are we doing this? Is the organization looking at something, or is this responding to an individual request or complaint? So you're consulting with everyone, you're developing the KSAs. You run this through cycles. You do a draft, you send it back through manager, incumbents, a department head, your manager, you get comments, you review the comments, you make adjustments, you run it through again. This is not a one-shot deal. This is not a, here's your job spec, thanks for cooperating. It's not that at all. You're going through a series of consultations, checks and double checks until usually things get signed off on by managers, by department heads. So you may be doing the work, but it's not going to be done until they are satisfied with the work being done. If it's in a civil service environment, it's not done until a Civil Service Commission says we will accept this job specification. So there's a lot of hoops to jump through. So make sure you do it, and don't be afraid to make corrections. So just a word on compensation, which I find to be a difficult topic, if only because it's so baked in. So unless you're really developing an organization from scratch, or really doing an overhaul of your organization's compensation system, there's not a lot outside of textbooky examples of compensation and where they come from, how we determine them. So I do encourage you, by the way, I think it's chapter 7 of the text really gets into merit pay, longevity pay, cost of living increases. It does a pretty good job in going into detail. Fundamentally, compensation is determined by three things. The market forces, so what are other organizations paying for similar jobs? So you see there are salary surveys and market conditions. Market conditions, are you looking at a national picture? Are you looking at a regional picture? Um, I would think national for only the highest positions. So, in city government, here we go with the turmoil again. Um, but what do other police departments of similar size, pay chiefs and deputy chiefs, or fire departments of similar size? Yeah, so you might do a national search, you might do a national comp review of similar positions and jurisdictions of similar size. For positions like a step or two down the management ranks, regional surveys may be wise. So if I was a city's training and safety manager, what does the city of Buffalo or Syracuse or Albany or Monroe County, how does it compare with those? So you've got those external uh, indicators to look at. You have internal consistency. Um, how is this management position that's on par with other positions that we have in the organization? How is this compensated? So I always considered myself kind of like third level down, which wasn't a bad place to be. But you have the mayor and senior management team, you have department heads, and then I was a direct report to one of the department heads. So I was in charge of the city's training and safety division. So I always thought of myself as 1, 2, 3 in the pecking level. How did that compare with other city departments, third person down? Whether it was like a bureau head or a division head in environmental services or even at the Rochester Public Library. If you're third down in the pecking order, what's the range at least? What are the strictures that you would put around a particular position's compensation just based on placement in the organization? So if you had a bureau level decision or position or a deputy bureau head in environmental services who was making $80,000 a year, and a bureau head in um, the Rochester Public Library who was making $40,000, you'd say, well, wait a minute, these are two bureau heads. Does this make sense? And you may be able to argue it, but I would maintain that if you have people in an organization on an org chart at essentially the same level, there should be a window of compensation that they would both fall into. And then finally, there's the individual consideration. So are there cost of living increases? Are there longevity pay? Some organizations will give a few extra dollars just based on your length of service. The city actually did that for a number of years until it was phased out. Um, Pay differentials. Pay differentials would be based upon where you're working. There's two locations. So let's say city municipal parking, say a function like municipal parking. You might have a central office at City Hall, and then you may have a remote location where parking is more expensive. So there may be a pay differential where a person may get paid more because the parking situation is different and it's more costly to work in one location than another. Oh, costly. So cost of living. Is there a greater cost of living for someone in an organization who's placed within a city or someone who's in a suburban area? And it could be travel distance, it could be cost of parking or vehicle tolls or whatever, shift differentials. So if you're working at in a less desirable shift, is there a pay differential for shift? So those are some of the individual considerations. All right. Um, Organizationally, short-term cost issues. What's this year's budget look like? And then there's that internal consistency that I spoke of. So the fundamental pay issues. How much is a position paid? What types of pay? We're going to look at that in just a second. I have a few fill in the blanks here, and I'll share with you. And then just maintaining employee motivation and morale, and to know that you've got good job analysis, to know you've got that good job specification that I know you're all going to do for me. Okay, so how accurately is the job defined? We determine your compensation by this job description of what you're supposed to be doing. So you better have a good one, okay? So here's a few of the fill in the blanks. So is there supervision involved? What's your span of control? Um, are you supervising 2 or 3 people? Are you supervising 25 people? What's the nature of the work? Again, frequency and criticality. Is there control over money? Do you have fiduciary responsibility? Do you have responsibility over an area's budget? Um, Contractors, payments uh, to service providers, consequences of failure. I always felt very, very fortunate until the safety piece was added to my job, which came a bit later. Um, Training had not a great consequence of error, meaning if I screwed up, I might have to cancel a training program. Um, I might not have, certificates to give somebody for some reason, but I generally wasn't costing people their paycheck or their life. So consequence of failure, consequence of error. If you screw up, what are the repercussions? And how do we compensate for, truly life and death situations? Okay, now, just to play that out, when manager of training became manager of training and safety, that did change a bit. And I would probably give you examples of, a couple of the um, most disturbing, jarring days of my professional career were, around safety and accidents and the worst days, the worst days. So, and then long-term responsibility and consequences. Are you really steering the ship? Are you kind of a transactional in a position that's purely transactional, move the paperwork? Are you in a position of long-term planning and leadership? Okay, and what is the consequence on the organization? Are you steering it in the right direction? What's that level five? Level five leadership is James Collins, Good to Great. Level five leadership is the person who looks beyond themselves. That's the level five leader. The person who just doesn't want to be successful in their time in an organization, but wants to set the organization up for future success. So I'll put that in the notes. Recommended reading, Jim Collins, Good to Great. Another big thing in the Duffy administration. I had to change all of my training programs to refer to Good to Great. Good book. So, um, methods in designing salary range structures. So we talked about market pricing, and that's this is I think this is from the text or from a supporting document with the text. Um, Market pricing, by and large, the predominant factor in setting compensation. There's something called point factor method that I'll just mention briefly because every time I get into point factor, I find it really difficult to explain. Um, Point factor method is when you take and put a weight on how important is level of education in this position, how important is experience, how important is supervision, how important is expertise, and you weight those. And by prescribing certain weights to them, you run a calculation that will help you determine a final compensation. Okay, so I think you find that in perhaps a lot of startups and newly developing businesses, um, not so much in established, and you see there's 4% of all. So the combination of market pricing and point factor, well, that's actually a reasonable thing because point factor probably does factor in when you take a look at, maybe not specifically, but when you take a look at where do you put a person's starting salary upon selection. So you're making an offer of hire, And you could put a person at the lowest salary step or a person in the middle, somewhere in the middle. And that may well be determined by one of those point factors. So, well, this person really has very little experience, very little supervisory experience. They qualify for the position, but we're going to start them out at the low end and let them work their way up through the salary schedule. Or this person comes really highly credentialed, has had a lot of experience, and so we are going to make a job offer to this person at a higher salary point within the range prescribed for that position. We're going to make an offer here more in the mid range because of this person's experience. You're never going to want to start somebody out at the highest compensation in a job salary schedule. But you're always going to have that wiggle room of, do we make an offer, in the earliest steps or somewhere mid-range? So, okay, so here's point factor analysis. Determine the complexity levels or degrees for each factor, assign points, knowledge, skills, abilities, license, certifications, responsibility, complexity, physical, work conditions. So which of those would you give more merit to? When we talk about forms of pay, I don't know how many of you would even be familiar with piecework. A bit of an old-fashioned term. That's like, how many widgets do you make a day? And you get paid by the output. Contractual labor is a contract that you enter into with a provider. There's the hourly wage, salaried hourly. You will find stock options and ownership options in some businesses. Deferred compensation, which is the ability to begin a retirement fund with pre-tax dollars to pull a certain amount of money out of your weekly or biweekly paycheck and contribute to an IRA pre-tax. That's a form of compensation. That's a benefit that would need to be counted. And then wages and salaries. So what's the base pay? What's the range of steps within a particular position? I'll show you that in just a minute. What incentives are there? Are there sales incentives? You hit your quota, you get a bonus. Okay. You would not believe how many times I've started this slide over again. This is about like take 10. So we're almost done though. Um, You'll often hear a 30% calculation tossed around when speaking of determining cost to an employer for a single employee. So, that is to say, if you have an employee who's making $60,000 a year, you can add 30% or about $20,000 based on benefits paid to the employee, educational benefits, healthcare benefits, some of the mandatory stuff that you see here, that you could add approximately another $20,000, so that $60,000 employee is costing the business about $80,000 to fund the position. During one of my on and offs here, I started to do a little bit of reading. I wanted to get some current numbers because this stuff is always changing. And I found an interesting note that the average employee in the United States makes $36.50 an hour. Now, I didn't read all the data behind this. I just took that as what I said, average employee in the United States, $36.50, of which $25 is wages, and $11.50 is benefits. So remember, I started by saying 30%, the 30%, this is actually 46%. And I think that is what we do find, that the 30% additional cost of benefits has worked its way up to mid 40s and approaching an additional 50%. So when you see some of these legal mandates, Social Security, 6.2, and that's employee contribution and then matched by the employer contribution of that same 6.2%. Medicare, 1.45% from employee and a matching 1.45% from the employer. Unemployment insurance rates, those first two are both federal. The unemployment insurance rates have a wide range and are determined by state. In the state of New York, the range is from 3.5 to 8.225, and that's the current I could find is 2018. And you can see how that's determined. You know, how long have you been in business? How many unemployment insurance claims have you as a business paid? What are the amount of benefits that have been charged to you? So that's adjusted annually. 2018 was the current uh, rate I could find, and you see that wide range from 3.5 to 8.2%. Okay, and that's just determined by history. So just a last couple of words on pay systems. So when we talk about pay systems, and I've alluded to this a little bit in the past, we talk about where you start a person, at what step do you start a person, what's the pay bracket, what's the step, what additional incentives are there, um, when will performance evaluations be given, will there be compensation increases based on performance uh, evaluations, and then certainly there's bargaining unit agreements. So what is the union's current contract arrived at for salaries and wages? This is a very simple pay grade chart. So if you have an organization where there are 5 pay grades, and okay, so you can look at this any way you want to look at it, that there's an entry level position or that there are lower compensated positions that would be at a grade 1. And then as you work your way through or up an organization, you move into a higher grade. And then you see the range that exists with each grade. The city called these steps. So we call them brackets and steps. So our grade would be a bracket, and then the grades you see here would be steps up the ladder. All right. So grade 1 beginning at 20, maxing out at 40. The 2 is going to start before you hit the 40, but once you've passed the midpoint of grade 1. Okay. And you see that consistently throughout. So usually the mid grade will be the midpoint between the highest and the lowest, and the next grade up will begin once you've passed the midpoint. So if you're giving someone a promotion, but there's no compensation increase, then why take the promotion? So you've got to put that incentive where you don't wait till you run the course in one grade before you move up to the next grade. Okay, if that doesn't make sense, ask me on Thursday. And then you see the highest there is 110 to 170. I'm going to take that as management leadership. Okay. So we'll end with this. Does merit pay work? I'll ask you all on Thursday. Have you ever seen an instance of merit pay that is salary increase based on performance be something that really is effective and really does work? The city tried it once. Back in some budget crisis days, the mayor froze management salaries. He froze those salaries that he was able to freeze. So not bargaining unit that he was required to give pay increases to, but management staff. And we were frozen for 2 years into a third or going on a third when this was Duffy came up with a merit increase. We're gonna do salary increases this year, but it will be totally merit driven. So each department was given a pot of money and given evaluations to do for all of their managers um, to go through the process. Um, I'll tell you how it worked out when we meet. Remind me, somebody. I'll tell you how it worked out if you remind me when we meet. But the funny thing was, well, it gets into the next point. Should pay be confidential? During one of those periods, I received a phone call from a friend who said, "Hey, you're on page 6 of the morning paper." So, oh no, what am I doing on page 6 of the morning paper? But it was when the DNC did a Freedom of Information, and they actually did it twice. One was just a general publishing of everyone in city government's salary. That was the first time, I think. And the second one was based on that merit increase, who in which department got how much. So it didn't take much with that one to drive employees to management employees like myself to grab a newspaper, and it was alphabetical or alphabetical by department maybe. And those who did not get the merit increase had their names redacted, had their names blacked out. So it didn't take much being alphabetical to have people sitting around trying to figure out, whose name came between, you know, Carney and Christopher, or Abbott and Costello. Here's an obscure reference. Um, and go, oh, look at who's blacked out there. She didn't get a merit increase, poor sucker. So yeah, that was an exciting morning. Um, so does merit-based work, should pay be confidential? And then finally, should executive pay be controlled? I said to you earlier that I found an article that said the average American um, hourly wage was $36.50. If you see by this link here from 2017 that CEOs make 271 times the pay of workers, I just did a quick calculation, and based on only on an 80-hour, 2-week biweekly pay period, um, that CEO would be making $20 million a year. So for an employee who was, I didn't do the 80-hour annual for the employee, but I think that would be about $80,000 a year maybe. So should executive pay be controlled? And by the way, what a surprise, the United States is way out of whack with its CEO pay as opposed to other nations throughout the world. I think like in Japan, it's 12 times more, or something almost reasonable. So uh, we're gonna end here. I'm gonna say thank you. I hope this doesn't run as long as for you as it has for me. I think once all the pauses are taken out of this, I hope it comes in at a reasonable time. Try to find some time to watch, and I'll see you all when we discuss it a week from today. Thank you.